Welcome in Ritch Winter, the business of sports. Rich is on the road. Rich, how you doing, my man?
Well, it's an interesting day. The assistant general manager's office in the bowels of the arena here in Hartford, no Wi-Fi. The hotel across the street doesn't have Wi-Fi for the lobby guests unless you have a room. So I'm sitting at a soda shop enjoying a Bananas Foster, which is kind of what you do on the road. You scramble to try and get things done. So it's been an interesting day, but there's nobody else here. And the Banana Foster's milkshake is actually pretty good. So it's worked out really well. And that's usually what happens. It usually works out pretty well.
Yeah, well, you got a nice background of like a pink on the walls there. It's very nice. So
well, my wife usually says to me, like, what are you doing tomorrow? And quite often I just don't know. Yeah. Because you don't know which guy's going to be at practice. I started this trip in Toronto, drove down all the way here to Hartford, down to Washington and New York tomorrow. And I was going the other way when I left home.
So I was going to ask you, as an agent, it's this time of year when you're on the road, you're obviously talking to some guys, NHL players, but also American League players, and some guys have a contract, some guys are probably thinking about what their next contract is. Is this a slow time for an agent, and what's the benefit of going around, to see the guys at this time of the year?
Well, for me, it's, I'm trying to manage my time with 5 kids, and, this is a good time. It's really slow at work on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday before Easter. So it's a good time to get on the road and get a lot of stuff done. And guys, there's certain guys that you just haven't seen for a while, the odd guy because you had trouble planning your schedules. But a lot of times, I met with a young man today whose contract's up. He's thinking KHL and other things. We just had a really good conversation around what he's got to do to finish the season. I think this time of year is a really opportune time for a lot of players because, a strong playoff. There's a rule in behavioral psychology called the peak end rule. Most of us know it by experience. You remember the thing that you experienced last. And Harvard's done some experiments where, for example, you put your hand in unbearably cold water for like a minute. And then they have you put the other hand in unbearably cold water for 3 minutes, but the last 30 seconds they warm it up. So, and we've all seen these players who have a strong playoff and we get insane money, right? Because that's what they remember. My goodness, if Jason continues this into the next season. So it's a really important time to remind some of the guys, talk about some of the things they need to work on. Today I talked with Jason Spezza at the Pittsburgh Penguins about a particular player and what he's looking for, what they're looking for from him. And they're all really excited about the prospect of him having a strong playoff. So it's a good time to be here, show a little support for a younger up and coming player who sometimes they don't get the attention, certainly from the big agencies that many of the smaller agencies do. So, it's interesting. I stopped and saw another agent in Rochester this morning. We had breakfast, talked a little bit about the marketplace. Just a lot you learn on the road. And you learn that the double tree has no Wi-Fi. So here we are.
Yeah, well, that's now you mentioned the Europe, because we talk a lot, and there's a lot of people out there that understand the negotiations for young players and going to the NHL and the AHL and stuff. But how and Rich, like, do you have like a somebody who knows the Europe teams better sometimes? Because I know some players have like a North American agent and they have a European agent. Do your guys have that, or do you just work and say, hey, I know somebody in Europe? And
no. Much more organized that. We have selected individual representatives in most countries because the markets are different. And I like to have some competition because what happens when you're dealing with an agent overseas, you share the commission with them. When you're dealing with multiple guys, you create a little bit of competition to drive the price out. Hey, look, I got a deal in the Czech Republic for 20 grand more. So we play that game, but it's the work that goes in sometimes surprised me. I have a young player, Danny Brickley, who played for the Kings for a bit of time. Last year was in Finland, had a very good year, and he's looking at a Czech team. Well, it's very important. You've probably heard me say there's 2 things in every contract: money and opportunity. So the opportunity in Europe lies in having a good season and pushing yourself into the next salary range, or playing well enough that you're going to get that $1 million deal from the KHL. So the other day, I guess Friday, I got Danny on the phone with one of a former client who's now a scout for a team we all know well, checked out his opinion of the team. His decision or his recommendation was, we obviously love the general manager and the owner because they're my former client, but Milan had an opinion that maybe the team's not good enough to provide the platform for him to step off of. And fortunately, Milan had seen him play just a few weeks before, so he was very confidently said to Danny, here's a guy who's getting married. He's not sure where he's going to play, how much money he's going to make. So to hear Milan say to him, look, I watched you. You're close to a point a game guy. Relax. Don't worry about it. You'll have lots of teams calling. So there's a lot of work sometimes just into dealing with just keeping guys comfortable. They're nervous. They're scared.
Yeah.
You got a guy that's getting married and he's got to pay for that and work on the mortgage for his home. So there's a lot of things, but the research we do, you want to get a lot of independent research. Of course, the team's going to tell you, great situation. We really like where we are. And the player needs to hear from, now in this case, he would like to go to Germany. One of my former clients, Stefan Ustorf's a GM over there, not with a wealthy team, not with a team that's likely to have much in their budget to pay a guy like Danny. So he gives us a pretty objective view. Consider this team for this reason. A lot of money, bad coaching, owner interferes. Now, with all this work, and I had that same conversation with the player I met today, now we feel we've got a path. But it's a path that it's not just in my head that I understand. It's a path now he understands, and he's a lot more patient now.
Now, when you look at the leagues overall, the KHL, I think, on average, pays the most money. Is that right?
Yes, although the German teams, some of them have got wealthy owners now. They're catching up because they're paying net. The Russians are paying, theirs is taxable, but you can manage the tax situation. So what the Swedish, a lot of teams, people don't understand when someone's getting 400 net. How does that happen? Well, what the team does is pays him enough money, submits the tax so that he just gets the net.
Yeah.
So and it's interesting.
Paying the tax, it's just not the player.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like in Russia, because the ruble adjusts so much. For example, a number of my clients who played in the KHL last year were quoted like $600,000-$700,000 US in salary. It ended up being 8 or 9 because at the end of the day, the ruble went up. And then, so the expectation this year is if the war settles, guys that are thinking they're going to get 800 end up with $1.1 million because the ruble goes up. So there's an awful lot of factors that go into trying to determine how and what decision to make. Financially, things can shift by 20% in Russia in a month and a half. It's interesting.
Yeah, it would be. And then like when you look at Finland and you look at Sweden, you look at the Czech Republic, there's obviously the Swiss league. There's a lot of different styles too, right? Some leagues are more defensive, some leagues a little bit more offensive. So, if you have a young player who you're like, well, hey, do at some point you say, we got to put you in an offensive league so you can put up some numbers, or are you better off to be in a defensive league because we think you're a checker? How does that work when you pick the league for the player, thinking that that'll be the best opportunity for them to get noticed and come back to the NHL?
Well, and generally it's not to get noticed to come back, but if it is to get noticed to come back, Sweden's a very good grounding for that. Switzerland's not bad. The problem with Switzerland is they demand a high level of skill and a lot of production from their top players. So you don't want to put a player that's modestly offensively talented there because that league's pretty good. It's pretty quick, a lot of skill. So, and then there's lots of thought, if he's coming back, like Giordano went there as a 22-year-old to the KHL for a specific reason, but he was young enough that he had enough, he had an awful lot of runway ahead of him. But I think at the end of the day, most players are there at 26, 27. They're trying to eke out a living. Now you've got a real balancing act to do now, because since the war started, if you play in the KHL, whether you're Canadian or American, you're tainted. The Swedish league will not allow you to come back and play.
Okay.
In there, so you've got, if you're
that's
going
a big decision. You're essentially limiting yourself to playing in one league in Europe forever, right?
Exactly. So you've got to be confident that the player is going to play, and you can't be, right? Because Russian coaches don't always speak English well enough so that they can work with a player. Sometimes, just like in any team, it doesn't work out well. Now you're scrambling to maybe play in Switzerland, but your player's not offensive. So there's a lot more work that goes into it. You have to have a lot of faith and trust in the people you're working with, that they understand the player and they understand where they're putting him. Like when I deal in Switzerland with the group we deal with, they also represent about 3/4 of the coaches. So we feel pretty good that we've got a pipeline there. They're talking to the coaches. The other thing I do with older players in the NHL and over there, I have them talk to the coach before we sign, because it doesn't take a player very long to figure out if the coach gets them, right? And then a little bit of self-preservation from my perspective too, because when he comes back to me and says, why did we pick Dusseldorf? I said, well, I didn't actually pick it. Remember, you did. Oh yeah, you're right, I did. So, but it's very important because we don't care what the general manager thinks of the player. We could care less, because he's not making any decisions that'll affect his future. You know, we care about it because if we think he likes him, we know that he's going to pay him. But that's it. You're done with the GM practically the minute this contract's done.
Ritch Winter joins us. I'll talk more about the agent work and that. I got some interesting ones about the NHL playoffs, and I know you're talking to a few clients and just looking at the NHL playoffs, and now it definitely becomes more of the business of sport for sure, where the business is winning and the dynamics change significantly. We get all that and more on the Gregor Show, presented by PlayAlberta.ca, and we'll announce who is our qualifier for Here Comes the Sun next on the Gregor Show, presented by PlayAlberta.ca. Welcome back to the Gregor Show, presented by PlayAlberta.ca. Hope you're having a lovely Wednesday. Oilers in San Jose to take on the Sharks. And Connor McDavid will play in his quest for his 8th 100-point season, and Stuart Skinner in goal. Time now to see who is our lucky qualifier today for Here Comes the Sun, courtesy of Action Electrical, where somebody, when we do the draw on May 23rd, is going to win a turnkey solar system for their home, valued at up to $15,000. Need to be a homeowner, must reside 50K inside the Edmonton area, newer shingles, 12 years younger. And Jim, he knew the correct answer, which was the two defensemen who have scored 30 goals this century, Cale Makar and Mike Green from the Washington Capitals. Congratulations!
Oh, thanks, Gregor.
Now, Jim, are you gonna keep this for yourself if you win, or do you want to gift it to someone? What's your plan? Is it too early to say?
I'm pretty selfish, so I'll probably keep it.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that, man. Nothing wrong with that at all. So, what's your thoughts on the Oilers against the Kings?
Guaranteed win.
Guaranteed win. I like the confidence. All right. Well, Jim, stay on the line. Connor's going to get all your information. You have one final step, as you just need, and Connor will tell you. You just send a paragraph as to why you want the system, why is there, or in some cases you're giving it to someone, but in your case you keep it for yourself, which is totally fine. And that will be your final entry, 100% into the draw. So good luck. We'll do the draw live on the show on Friday, May 23rd.
Awesome. Thanks, Gregor.
There you go. Your next chance to qualify tomorrow at 4 o'clock, where you can win $15,000 solar system for your home, courtesy of Action Electric. See all the details at jasongregor.com or sports.ca. We continue on the business of sport. Ritch Winter joins us as always. And Ritch, we talked earlier about kind of the different leagues, and you've been doing this for a long time, and just how much has it changed, right? Like, because there's lots of guys who will play 100, 200 games, 300 games in the NHL, and then, 26, 27, and sometimes you're out of the league. There's other players who come out of college or junior hockey, and they find they have really long 10, 15-year careers in Europe. And it's awesome. You get a great lifestyle. You can travel and learn different things. How much better, have the league's gotten over the last, let's say, decade or 15 years, where you feel even more comfortable to send clients to go play?
Well, it's be a surprise to a lot of people, but most of the facilities in Finland, Sweden, Russia, and in Germany and Switzerland are as good or better than the NHL. Buildings are good, training facilities are good, so it really has changed dramatically. It's and in fact, many of the better training facilities and rinks are in Europe and versus in the NHL. Many because a lot of newer buildings, a lot of great technology and architectural capabilities over there. So it's really interesting. And gone are the days where you had to cross your fingers to see if you're going to get paid. Can I just clarify, this isn't the pictures that are in my office normally? I'm stuck in a soda shop in Hartford.
Hey, now when you talk about the finances of the league, and so I believe for many years in the NHL, the hardest job was to be the tough guy, because it was incredibly taxing mentally. You're playing 4 minutes a night. You might get your face punched in. It's pretty stressful. Guys talk about they couldn't sleep, brutal. Nowadays, to be that 11, 12 forward who's playing 8, 9 minutes a night and you try to impress the coach, you don't know if you're in the lineup, it becomes stressful, right? Most of those guys are making league minimum, which is still really good money. But if you go to Sweden and you go to Finland, what's an average Canadian or an American player making in those leagues? And when you look at that, and maybe it's tax-free, is the stress level and the enjoyment of hockey better for some players over there?
Well, the enjoyment's better for a lot of players because they're skilled enough to get a bigger role and they just want to play, right? That's right. At the end of the day. But there are a lot of family issues that come into play. For example, Devin Shore is a client who's been in Minnesota most of the year, but on a two-way, starts in the minors, sets up his family in the minors, gets called up, doesn't know if he's coming back, spending a lot of time in a hotel with his young family. And you think at the end of the year, you say to yourself, for a little less money, do I want to be parked in Switzerland where I'm going to be home virtually every night with my young family? There's a lot of factors that go into it. And some of it's just as simple as, look, I played 100 games in the NHL. I haven't saved a lot of money. And the KHL is paying me $1 million. And politically, some people might find that, why are you going there? Putin doesn't have anything to do with the organization, your teammates, or any of those kind of things. But sometimes you just, you're starting to feel it at 29, 30. I got to go. So you factor in family, you factor in finances, and then you do the best research you can to put them in a position if they're one of those little lower echelon players that's going to have to catch on through Germany and then work his way to the KHL. You make a bit of a plan and try and understand what kind of money they're going to need to be comfortable as they can be for the rest of their lives. And these, like you say, these guys can go over there and play 5, 6, 7 years. It's not as taxing. Travel's not as tough. You eke out an extra 3 or 4 years at $300,000 or $400,000. And your question related to salaries, they range from 150 to 250 in most of the leagues, a little higher at the top end in Sweden and Germany, but basically pretty similar other side of the KHL. So in the Czech Republic now, Czech Republic's paying guys 150, 250,000. And some of those cities are amazing, right? I mean, you play
and then do you get a vehicle and room and board on top of that?
Yeah, generally. So when you go to, you go overseas, the only thing you're paying for is the food you're buying at the grocery store. Generally, like here, meals at the, breakfast at the rink, lunch at the rink. If you're a single guy, you're buying, now in Switzerland, you're buying pizza and it costs you about as much as a car payment. But outside of that,
it is expensive there.
Three of us went for a pizza and the boys had a couple of drinks. I don't drink. And it was $180 for just a pizza. It's crazy. But so those things you factor in. And, Germany's really stepped up lately. The co-owner of SAP, Hasso Plattner, owns the San Jose Sharks. His co-founder owns Mannheim. Right. They have accommodations that would rival the nicest places you could find anywhere in North America. So that's a factor, right? You show your wife the pictures and she's going, holy smokes. Then you talk to somebody, they're having a child. Is that a problem? They've got young kids. Now it gets a little more complicated when the kids are 6, 7, 8 and attending school. So you've got to look for places that have English language instruction for grades 1, 2, and 3. Just an awful lot of issues to manage that you don't worry about here, right? You sign and usually the wife figures out, the player's wife figures out all of those issues because there's kindergarten everywhere in North America. And so that's a bit, there's just a lot that goes into it, but it can be a very good life. A guy, works there for 5, 6, 7 years, banks a couple $1 million. It's a lot of money. And the rigors, just driving around, the rigors, you talk to these kids and you forget they're in the bus for 8 hours going back home and they're playing 72 games. And the physicality in the American Hockey League, I think, is tougher. You start looking at all of those things, it looks pretty attractive to play in, a place like Germany.
Oh, yeah. Well, the German leagues, I know, and we had the GM Dunham from Germany, and he's been in that league for a long time. And, he just talked about how they've really put an emphasis on developing their players. He was very honest. He feels that, maybe our young guys at 18, 19, they're not as advanced, but you get to 24, 25, and we feel a lot of our players now are, can compete, and a lot of them can come over if they wanted to and take a run at it. We saw Josh Szymanski just signed, so, you're going to see a few other guys like that. Now, what about, because we got a lot of texts. Hey, guys, I understand if you go over there and you got an NHL resume, you probably got an advantage. What about guys coming out of university, Rich, or coming out of college who are good players, but maybe not good enough to play in the NHL. What about like, starting out in the second tier Europe leagues? How, what's the long-term sustainability of that? Is it more like a fun experience, or do history tells you that there's a good chance that you could turn that into, a legitimate career as a player in Europe?
Well, like it depends on the player. Danny Brickley played in the NHL, then struggled a bit after his father died of cancer. He lost his confidence. He wasn't feeling good about his game. We put him into the second league in Sweden. He played, he dominated, he got to play, he just got to think hockey and relax, because when hockey's going well, players never think about it. When it's not going well, they can't think of anything else. So and then he works his way to the Swedish league, over to Finland. Now he's probably getting $300,000 or $400,000 a year, but it's not likely to work that way for the young kid coming out of college who hasn't displayed anything at the level of capabilities that Danny Brickley did. On the other hand, there's teams like you talk to the German league. Remember, I just mentioned Stefan Ustorf is a German general manager of a German team. Not very much money. Like he said to us, it's very clear, Danny, I have no money for you, so I'm going to give you what I think is the best advice. But more importantly, he says what he's mining is the really talented East Coast League player, skilled. Now he knows he'll take his money because $400 a week or whatever they're getting in the East Coast League is not. He can compete with that. And he knows, he just recognizes, like in the old NHL, where we had a lot of disparity between what teams are playing, he just knows he's got the player for a year or two, right? And so he's got a totally different business model. In Slovakia, great place to live, beautiful country. They're paying a lot less, but you play in Slovakia, maybe that's a stepping stone to the Czech Republic. And you got to look at all of this stuff. Czech Republic's a great feeder system to the KHL, so you may place a player in the Czech Republic. But there's a vast difference in the Czech Republic between the quality of the organizations, the quality of the cities. And sometimes you have players go, oh, I've had players go to the Czech Republic have really bad experiences. Well, they're in teams D, E, and F versus teams A and A, A1 and A2. So there's just a lot of mechanics to deal with. And that's where you really are reliant. We understand the NHL, we understand the American Hockey League, but you can't be on top of every market. So, 3 phone calls after, in Danny Brickley's case, 3 phone calls after he has talked to other people, he's not interested in that job now. And you just got to be very careful, because I think when players are in these situations, the money, the longevity of their career is critical. Connor McDavid, Tyler Bertuzzi, Zach Hyman, it's not an issue, right? It's not an issue that they're going to have enough shekels to buy disability insurance or to get a mortgage or to buy a house. So these decisions you make for players often can, restart and create a new career, a second career, a new chapter, or it can kill it. So there's a lot of risk that comes with it. You got to be careful.
Yeah. What about the import rule in those leagues now for Canadians? Or Americans? Is it getting harder? Is it getting easier? Like as Germany starts to develop more players, are they shrinking their imports, or do they want the best players regardless? How's that work?
Well, they want the best players they can afford, right? They don't live in a salary cap world, but they live in a budget world. You talk to the guys in Mannheim, I think they're the Detroit Red Wings. We want them, we're paying for them. Like if the owner in Mannheim wants a player, there's nobody in Germany that can compete with the price he'll pay. So, it just depends on some of them are in smaller towns and just don't have the budget. Some of them are community owned. And it's tough, man. I know Marty Strack owns a team in Pilsen, Czech Republic, just getting sponsors and fighting through all of that. It's tough. The economies I'm at an AHL game in Hartford. This is a robust, decent sized American city. Marty's in a small town. It's just not the companies. There's not the sponsorship. So it's really challenging for them. But again, it's just it's an interestingly flip of the model, because we rely a lot on the gate here. And in Europe, in all sports, they tend to rely a lot more on the sponsorship. So those are the relations you need to covet. And if you're in Mannheim or Berlin, your sponsorship revenue stream is incredible. If you're in a smaller town like Freiburg, you're probably pretty much screwed from the get-go. So to me, it's a whole lot different than the old NHL, where you had the Red Wings spending $85 million and San Jose spending 18 or 20 or whatever it was back then.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Oilers were one of the smaller spending teams too, up until post
Yeah.
salary cap for sure. Ritch Winter joins us. Business of sport today. We're talking a little bit different. We've talked a lot about the NHL, but the whole part of business of sport was to kind of understand all the different levels and elements. And the NHL is obviously what we cover on a daily basis in hockey, but there's lots of opportunities. But again, when we say lots, that's all relative. It's not like every player. Because I hear it all that, like I had players tell me, oh, you know what, my son's he plays in the Western League and he's at the university right now. You know what, his goal is he wants to go to Europe, and I'm kind of like, oh yeah, well, what are his stats in university? And he's a 4 and he had like 6 goals, and I'm like, dude, where do you think you're going to go?
No way, buddy.
Like not to be rude, but it kind of it's not like Europe is just, hey, you know what, I'm a former 30-goal scorer in the WHL and I got 6 goals in university hockey. Now suddenly teams are going to be tripping over me to come and play. Like these are still good leagues. They're professional leagues. And the other thing, Rich, is my understanding is they can be pretty ruthless at times. You go over there and you don't start producing and you're an import, you're out pretty quick.
Yeah, and there's been some high-profile players that have done that recently, and huge expectations, big money paid, and they find themselves released. There is similar restrictions,
really guaranteed contracts, right? Is it?
No, they're not all guaranteed. Many leagues, mostly the European leagues, but in the KHL they have an out at particular times, and right. That going in. So it can be pretty risky. And again, it's just, and there's so many moving parts. We talked about the nil rights the other day. We've talked about college. So you've got a young man coming out of the Western Hockey League. Maybe a late draft pick, didn't get signed, had pretty good season, couldn't find a job, because we got to remember here, there's only 50 contracts. They really like the player, but I'm 2 contracts shy of the max. So can we wait? Can we try an AHL deal? That kid gets a call from Europe, or he gets a call from now a college team. So he's weighing an education, which his parents are pushing for. He's thinking of going to Austria because he thinks he might build a future there. He has a friend who's playing for Salzburg. And the dynamics are now, like it was so much easier before. And it's really come down to, and I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing so much consolidation. Kurt Overhart's company just sold to the Wasserman, which is a fairly big group. And because you need all that support now. You can't just be a guy with 3 clients working part-time as a lawyer. There's just too much opportunity to screw your clients screw up by being uninformed.
Yeah, well, and that's always the key. But I think the out clause is very unique and it's different. And like I know sometimes, and we get it all the time, there shouldn't be guaranteed contracts in the NHL. And it's easy for fans to say that in media, because it's you're not on the line, and it's hard to gauge all the time. Hey, let's just release a guy because the NFL does it. Well, the NFL used to do it, and now they got so much money that's guaranteed on contracts than ever before, because the players realize, like, man, this is a tough sport, right? Like the line, like the Connor McDavids and the Leon Draisaitl doesn't have to worry about anything, but you get to a lot, 60% of your league, and those guys are, game to game, and some organizations are like, we're out just because we made a wrong decision and now we want to get rid of you. So they'll never get rid of the contract.
Jason, and people don't really see the real world and how it unfolds. You've got a player that maybe got drafted by the LA Kings. He's played 3 or 4 years with the Kings, a little bit down in the minors there in Ontario. He's made a decent living. He's fallen madly in love with a young girl from California. And then he doesn't give any thought to this. He's fallen in love. He wants to stay in America. He's released, and his career's over at 27, 28. He's got $500,000 in the bank, which sounds like a lot of money, until you realize it could be $25,000 to $30,000 a year to buy medical coverage, none of which has been provided by the National Hockey League to these players. It's mind-boggling that these guys can give what they give so we can enjoy what we see on the ice every night, and they don't have benefits when they retire. So now a young man is facing a wife who wants to stay near home, never contemplated moving back to Saskatchewan, who's been working and living in a higher, sort of a more urban environment. Now he can't afford to live where his wife and family are living. He can't. So he's got lots of decisions to make. That's why he might take the KHL offer. But it's oftentimes why families fall apart. This is a very difficult business on families. Yeah, it's easy to say you get cut. Well, and sometimes I forget, I get a player traded and I go back home and have dinner. And he gets on the plane and his wife's scrambling to get the kids and they got to move. They got to deal with all of these kinds of things. I had like a meeting this scheduled for yesterday. Well, the younger player plays here on the East Coast and his parents came in unexpectedly to help him move out of his apartment. Well, he's 20, he's still a kid. So people just don't really think of the human element. And this is a hard job. I mean, you're going to work and guys can actually body check you out of your desk, take your job, grab your pen, punch you if they like. Yeah, it's easy to say that. And you have at best, if you're an elite player, a 10 or 15 year career. If you're an average player, it's probably 4, 5, 6. And you come at it with half the money a teacher would save over the course of their career. It's not that. And you're 30 and you have no money to acquire these things. I remember working with a career counselor a number of years ago where we had a client who was a farmer from Saskatchewan, fell in love with a model in Los Angeles, and she had no inclination to leave. So with a lot of hard work, we found him a job selling dairy equipment to dairy farms in the lower Southern California area. It worked, but he was looking at maybe losing his family. It's a job. I think my family's moved across the river, and when we did that, yeah, it was challenging. We had to go to new school. I mean, not that challenging, but again, this is extremely difficult, and there's so many variables, and you need to do everything you can to help a kid maximize his earnings because they're not generally equipped for life after hockey. Most have no education, most have no skills, and you need to try and do the best you can to give them some runway with some income and savings so that they have a bit of time to figure life out. And many of them don't. There's lots of alcohol problems. Claude Liu used to tell me, here's retirement for an NHL player if he has some substance. Takes the kids on a couple vacations they could never do while he was playing. Takes his wife to those 2 romantic spots, one on the Amalfi Coast and maybe Hawaii. And then he comes back and sits in the kitchen. And he really has no idea what to do. And having gone from star, I remember when I represented the retired players when we brought an action against the NHL for stealing $50 million of their pension money, which we ended up winning. But, it's interesting that the middle players, the stars, of course, get recognized till they die. But it's amazing how fast someone says, hey, you used to play what, Leafs? Red Wings? And you become very quickly. I remember Tyson Nash telling me, it's frightening because what happens, you don't expect it to end. And he said, they don't slam the locker room door behind you. They lock it. In 10 minutes, you can go from a member of the team to thank you for all you've given to this organization. And we try and help the players prepare and give thought to that. But the challenge is it's so hard. And usually they're fighting so hard, most of them for their positions. It's hard to take 2 or 3 days off to do some career planning and career testing. It's a complicated business, and it's one where young men are relying on us to help them maximize and optimize what they can get out of their short tenure in the game. And, the decisions we make, the challenges I have with the big agencies, warning, they recruit like a puppy mill. They bring in 1,000 puppies, and the ones that die, it's life. And they don't take care of them. They have no time. They're so focused on the big stars. And I think a note to any young parents who have kids that are in the Western Hockey League, be very careful, because if you're not with an agency, and there's a lot of them that care, I have a lot of friends. I met with Steve Bartlett here in Rochester. Kurt Overhart's a really dear friend of mine. There's a lot of agents that do a good job, and they do a good job even when you're down and out. But when you need an agent is when you are down and out. They better have a plan to get you $80,000 a year in Austria or a good deal in Germany or the Czech Republic. Because when you aren't attractive to an agency, especially a big agency, is when you need their help more than ever. Quite frankly, Jason, my best clients, probably you could do the deal. Anybody could do it. It's a little research. You know the game very well. Figure out the comparables and hold your own in a negotiation. But it's these other things that are very important to a family. I met with Vinny Prospo. I was here, longtime client of mine. I remember the day he called me and said he fell in love with Monica and he wanted to bring her to America. They're still married. They have 4 kids, a boy and 3 girls. But and it's just that's not every case, and Vinny played 800, 1,000 games, made a lot of money, but there's a lot of these kids now struggling to coach in the American Hockey League just to make 50 grand.
Yeah.
And again, we look at the stars, good for them, but I think the most important thing in life for all of us is having a purpose, and the purpose for these young men from the age of 3, 4, 5 was hockey. And when that's taken away from them, there's just a lot of dynamics and a lot of support that they need to get on their way. And, Europe's part of the plan, playing there, looking for jobs. I mean, it's funny. I remember when the kids came over from the Czech Republic initially. As they retired, I probably placed 80% of the Czech scouts because, I was one of the first guys there. Now there's no more jobs. So I get the call all the time. Well, maybe I could be a scout. Sorry, those jobs have been gone for 10 years and will be for another 10. So
there's not many.
It's fun. I'm excited tonight because some of the things in life we don't think about. I'm seeing a young man who grew up in my hometown, Drumheller, and he's playing his first game I'm going to see. I know it's just the American Hockey League, but it's exciting to, be part of these guys' lives, especially in this case, because he's been, family's been longtime friends of my family. But that's the other thing we don't think about. When I saw Vinny Prospal the other day, I thought, man, he's gray in the beard. I remember I told him this story. I remember I dropped him off in the American Hockey League with a guy named Milos Holan. And I remember driving my rental car away, looking in the mirror, and these two guys looked so forlorn and so lost. I couldn't imagine them ever making much of themselves. They were so scared. They didn't speak the language. And here he is, 15, 20 years later, happily married, coaching, probably got tens of millions of dollars in the bank. And you get to travel with them on that journey. And, that's why I explain to people, it's not the money, it's not the contracts, it's being part of people's lives and helping them become successful, and that's what this is all about, being on the road, seeing them, and especially the kids in the minors. I'll see a few of them. They really need to know you care, right? Just imagine being a parent, never showing up in the American Hockey League for the whole year.
Yeah.
It's hard for them. They just need to know that you're on it and that you care enough that you're here. So it's important. That's why we do it. Hopefully it helps them feel comfortable enough. They're not panicking for the next 3 months before they get their deal done.